Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, this is a really long video, and even splitting it into 3 pieces, each piece is really long, so here comes part 2. Okay. Make sure the squeezing dies are not going to burn me. Squeezing dies can get very hot. So reconfiguring now for I'm going to use the 1.5" fixed size dies. I could use the iris dies, but the design that I'm attempting to create here seems to be more appropriate with the fixed dies. As the piece gets larger, I'm going to switch to the 1.75" dies, which will end up being the final size of the finished piece. So, like so many things in this project, I've been having an internal debate with myself about, should I show the videos where I'm doing things that I'm less comfortable doing? Or should I wait until I've got it nailed and then show how I do it? And I may not do it perfectly, but I do some things better than I do other things. And I decided to just turn on the camera and just let it go. Show my R&D. Show the things I don't know how to do yet. Hey, why not? Doesn't cost anything. That's the amazing part about modern digital photography. Not like I have to buy film. Starting to get my bottom flattened out. I did fairly well. I actually did better than I usually do getting the pieces to line up. They're actually pretty close to in the same plane. So, hey, maybe I am getting better at this. So I'm doing a combination of old school marvering and a little bit of squeezer. And like I said, I'm making it up as I go. I have no idea what the correct proportion is between the two. But then again, there may be lots of experienced workers making murrine the old way, but nobody has experience using this squeezer except me. Which of course is a very comfortable position to be in for an R&D engineer. It's the world I live in. The world I've lived in for my entire professional career. Being the first one ever to use something. Trying to figure out, does this thing work at all, or does it take skill to learn and I don't have the skill yet? You can only imagine Igor Sikorsky. His first helicopter sucked balls, and there were no helicopter instructors. He had to teach himself to fly a helicopter he built that was barely flyable and sucked balls. I mean, it's hard today for a student to fly a really nice trainer helicopter that's designed to be easy for a student to learn on. Whew. Boy, that's hot. I should have my glove for that. So yeah, that's what I'm always asking myself. Am I Igor Sikorsky, trying to teach myself to use something I invented that will eventually turn out to be great? Or am I wasting my time on a bad idea? But that's what makes it fun. That's why I love R&D. And for me, it's the most comfortable place to be. It's my comfort zone. Some people might find it terrifying. For me, I feel like, yeah, I'm home. I'm home in the R&D lab. And yes, once the pandemic madness has passed, I am very interested in collaborating with glassworkers, taking lessons. I don't have to invent everything from scratch. I love learning. Yeah, that one worked too. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. Be interesting to see if somebody with really good sculpting skill would find this method to be useful, using the NQALHA to hold the workpiece while manipulating with sculpting tools. I kind of start with a 3.5-inch piece because I know they get longer as they go. And the squeezer dies are only 4 inches. So, and besides that, anything more than 4 inches is pretty close to impossible to control. But I know they grow a little. And so, starting with 3.5-inch pieces, by the time the thing is done, it's going to be roughly 4. And then, when I finally pull it, assuming it doesn't fail catastrophically along the way, when I finally pull it, I'm going to pull it down to about, I don't know, 10 inches long. 10 or 11 inches long will be the final result. Now it's just a matter of, I got one more layer to put on, but throughout the process I've been kind of gently coercing it into a triangular form. My weld end get cold. I'd hate to have the thing fall off after all this work. Now, anybody out there in YouTube land who's actually done this kind of work knows that how much time is invested once you get to the final assembly. It can be weeks of work. For some really complex pieces, it can be months of work. some of the truly amazing glass artists out there. Scott Deppie, the Mothership Boys, Banjo, their assemblies are just astounding. And you can only imagine how many hours of work, how many hours of prep there were in the components before they were assembled. Okay, one more. Then comes the fun part. I'm going to use one of my more interesting shape dies on the squeezer and squeeze some rather large divots into the, once the triangle is formed, I'm going to squeeze some rather large divots into the side, causing the internal layers to flow in very interesting ways. That really is what creates the magic in this design, is how the material flows when squeezed. One thing I'm learning, that the back alignment here can be really tricky if I'm not looking at it. But it aligned correctly. All is well. And that one popped off. Boy, hope I don't get too confident. I'm at the stage in my glassworking adventure where it kind of surprises me when it works. Slightly triangularizing. nailed on a little bit right there to help strengthen my moil. Do it on this side too. Well, there we have the flat components are assembled. Now I squeeze it into a nice tight compacted triangle, hopefully with any luck won't have too much air in it. That's always the challenge when putting these together, is to avoid trapping air. Starting to work on building a heat base. I have no doubt that all these internal layers are cold as can be. I look at the end and it's dark. And so, in order for the next, after it's fully triangularized, in order for the next squeeze to work as planned, I need the entire triangle piece to be soft all the way through. I do like these long punties. Yeah, I can tell by the way the squeezer feels. The piece is totally cold. Got no core heat whatsoever. Like trying to squeeze a brick. But I can fix that with fire. And as I've said before, I really love the Delta Mag for making pieces like this. When the piece ends up in its final shape, it's going to have a lot of radiant heat. I tell you, I say, and I'll tell you again. Starting to get a little bit of droopage. starting to feel like it's squeezing a little. I felt a little bit of squeeze action going on there. Of course, I believe, I'm not entirely sure of this, but it certainly does make sense that every time I put it in the squeezer, I'm freezing the surface and I'm not affecting the core heat. So I can, by doing this, return it to the flame and continue building my core heat without overheating the surface, because every time I put it in the squeezer, it cools the surface. Not sure this is right, but hey, it sure does sound reasonable. The other alternative would be, don't squeeze it when it's too cold. Leave it completely out of the squeezer. Build a proper core heat, and then squeeze. I suspect it would produce two completely different results. I'm now working on the end, which kind of looked like it was getting a little cold and needed a little help. It's approaching triangularness. And I am going to be interrupted here. I just looked over at my tank. Oxygen's getting low. So, not the worst time to run out of oxygen, since everything is more or less consolidated and compacted. When I'm using the squeezer, you can't see this on video, but sometimes I push down this way as I see it getting maybe too thick on the bottom That's what it was that time. It was getting a little too thick on the bottom, and the top was a little too thin, so I gave it a little help. Two-handed punty. Oh, I like the two-handed punty. And as I've said before, I like the NQALHA when it makes sense. I use it when it makes sense, but there are other times when handwork just works for me. So I've just about got the piece triangularized. When I first came up with the idea for the squeezer, I had no idea how it would actually work, what it would feel like to use it. It feels really different from what I expected. There's a lot more skill required. I had assumed that it would be more machine-like, but no, like all things in glasswork, using the squeezer requires skill. I'm working on the end here. Kind of hard to keep the end hot because, you know, it's got a lot more surface area. The heat's escaping from the end. So the center is consolidated pretty well. The end still has a little bit of trouble. Yeah, that did it for that side. The danger in using the squeezer, the problem that I'm constantly, and you can't really see it in the video, but what I'm constantly working on, the glass has a tendency to get non-uniform. It'll get thicker in the middle, thinner in the middle, and whenever I see it happening, I gotta very quickly, before it becomes a problem, take action. So it looks like Mr. Oxygen Tank is ready for a change. And of course, this is the perfect opportunity to point out that when you need to do something that isn't glassworking, just use the NQALHA, park the piece over the Bunsen, keep it hot, go do what you gotta do. And of course, while it's parked there, and go over to the squeezing dies are not quite hot enough to burn, but so now I'm going to be installing the next set of dies. And these, you can see, this one is a kind of a pointy triangle. And this is what I'm going to use to push the divots into the piece. See how that works like that? And then into the divots will go some more of my cane. Then I'll do some striping. And hopefully, if nothing fails catastrophically, end up with a piece at the end of this. So just let it cook. Gotta be somewhat careful about overheating the points of the triangle when I'm doing this. That's why I'm kind of off in the far flame. But I definitely need core heat for this next operation. It won't work without it. So I gotta make sure my core heat is good. And yes, for those who are watching this that are not glass workers or have never done this type of glass work, boy, it takes a long time to get the heat down into the core. Glass is an insulator. Seems to take forever. Tiny bit of droop there. Droop is a good indicator that starting to get some core heat. I tilted the NQALHA up for two reasons. I kind of don't want the thing to grow anymore. Droop. I kind of don't want the thing to grow anymore. And it also allows me to get, with that angle, to get a little more coverage on the flame. Getting very close to the point where I switch to handwork. I like that long punty. So now at the angle here in the large Delta Mag flame, pretty much can get the entire piece in the flame. Of course, got to remember that the ends are going to be the hard part. The middle heats up too quick, overheats too quick, while the ends are cold. And it's a kind of a balancing act because the end is also what holds it up. So if I get the end too hot, I lose control. Marvering to control shape and to try to stabilize the outside so I can force the heat into the core and still maintain a bit of control, because it's getting hard to control. Trying to very gently, as it drifts out of shape a little bit, kind of putting it back into shape a little on the marver. And yes, I know it's possible. I've seen glassworkers do this kind of work without a squeezer, using just the marver. And of course, like everything about glass and really any activity, machining, woodworking, there's more than one tool for the job. I always like to have a full toolbox. Starting to see a bit of a glow coming out of the center, which is a good sign. little bit by little bit, building core heat, refining the shape ever so slightly. I don't need to perfect the surface at this point, because it's got a lot more squeezing to do, a lot more work to do. But as long as it's in the fire, as long as I'm working on it, might as well clean it up a little bit. It's a slow process, and as I've said before, I don't speed up or edit these videos because, at least for me when I was first learning timing is really important. It might be one of the most important things. Learning how heat flows through the glass is the most important thing in my opinion. And timing is probably right up there with that, number 2. So I think it's going to be getting soft. And that is, you can see there on the camera, over to the other camera here, that is what I have. And yeah, that's the tool that makes the magic happen. A lot of what's interesting about this pattern is as a result of that operation. And I suspect that this is going to be true as I develop a variety of other squeezing dies. I suspect that a lot of patterns will emerge based on the geometry of the die and how it's used. And of course I see potentially, looking into the far future, a nearly endless variety of squeezing dies. And I don't have to invent them all. I can imagine lots of people coming up with ideas for squeezing dies. So, getting hot in the hot shop.